Reporting live now to London. We're just in minutes, 2 or 3 minutes to be exact. The UK will be officially leaving 28-nation bloc of the European Union. Let's have a look at these. We're looking at this. These are protests. People for Brexit pumped up that the Leave camp has finally prevailed after years of trying to draw out this protracted process to get out of the European Union. The UK is just moments away from doing so. Let's listen in. That was Nigel Farage of the Brexit Party on stage, pumping up the crowd there, leading up to the UK's departure there at 11 p.m. London time, which will be at midnight Brussels time. Friday evening, London will be officially withdrawing from European Union, albeit though diving into a very strange abyss of a transition period where a lot still needs to be hammered out with respect to trade, customs, free trade market, all of the above, and much more, law enforcement, and a myriad of other issues. You can see the countdown there on your screens there, 1 minute and 40 seconds left before the UK officially exits the European Union. Now, after the UK formally leaves, there's still a lot of talk about and months of negotiations to follow. There still needs to be a single market. Customs union needs to be hammered out. Law enforcement, data sharing and security, aviation standards, safety. These are all things that need to be decided. They're going to stay in place at least until the end of the year. Access to fishing waters, supplies of electricity and gas, licensing, regulations of medicines. This is just a small list of things that still need to be hammered out. So this is really a transition into a transitional period, but it's all for the time being chalked up in the name of an official Brexit is about to take place in 30 seconds.
That question will be hanging for quite some time. Boris Johnson faces a huge task, not to open English champagne tonight, but show to voters that they made the right decision. Faith in him and his beliefs is the right choice for all of us.
And there's the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. There you have it. Britain has officially exited the European Union. Viewers, how does it feel? Prime Minister Boris Johnson has promised a new era of friendly cooperation with the European Union, as Britain has now just left the 20-nation bloc, leaving 27 members intact. Johnson has called it, his quote was, the most important thing to say tonight is that this is not an end but a beginning. He's much more optimistic than a lot of heavy hitters over in the European Union itself, including the European Parliament, European Commission, and leaders of other European countries, the European Union. Pardon.
gracious Queen, long live her noble Queen, God save the Queen, send her victorious, happy and glorious.
If you're just joining us, we are live in London. It's 11 p.m. London time, midnight Brussels time. UK has now just exited the European Union. It first joined back in 1973 and has now been the first member state to withdraw the 28-nation bloc, leaving 27 members. The UK economy accounted for about 10 to 15% of revenues for the European Union, so it's a big blow to the European Union. We'll see how London fares from this day on forward. Joining us is Rodney Shakespeare, professor of binary economics, joining us out of London, and Tony Gosling, investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol. Gentlemen, I want to welcome you both to the program. We'll start with you, Professor Rodney Shakespeare. Your thoughts on how does it feel, and what do you expect will the UK will be facing from this day forward?
The original agreement with Europe, 1973, and then confirmed by the public in 1975, was that the UK wanted to trade with Europe. And that worked sort of reasonably well until you get to about 1992, and you start to get the political deepening. The UK resisted the euro, but if it had got into the euro, then the deepening would have been much deeper. By 2009, the political deepening gets very, very strong. And effectively, you've got the development of a unified political state. And at that point, I think, you find the quietly going underneath it, the tensions really starting to build, because you see the UK originally and right the way through probably did not want, and probably does not want, that level of unification. It's really wanting the trade. The problem now is whether we're now sort of out of the frying pan into the fire, because first of all, we have to try to negotiate an immensely complicated thing in 1 year. And if we don't, we will end up with a no-deal Brexit. And no-deal Brexit is a sort of fantasy land. It's not just that we are out, it's that this is the British Empire ruling the world. In fact, that's fantasy land. To think that we'll be able to compensate for loss over time, gradual loss increasing in respect of Europe by trading more with America, is fantasy land. At this moment, our exports are about 45% to Europe and imports about 53. America is only 15. And this idea that we can sort of deal with the Americans in some way that we couldn't deal with Europe is complete and absolute nonsense. So it's a very dangerous situation, on top of which, if anybody thinks that we're going to get any favors from America, forget it. The Americans are already saying they're not going to give an inch. We're going to get their chlorinated chicken. We're going to pay very high prices for their medicines. And of course, any deal with America will require that we sell off, say, for example, parts of the national health service. So I'm afraid we are entering a difficult period. I don't think it's necessarily there's an easy way out of it. It could go badly wrong. Conventional thinking is that there will be an economic loss of somewhere between 4, 6, 8% round there for a whole number of years. So we may have taken out of the frying pan into the fire. And if you then look at the economic thinking of the hard Brexiteers, then God help us. They are going for temporary part-time jobs, the sort of Singapore on Thames, with the difficulties that In Singapore, when people lose their jobs, they don't lose their housing because the state sort of guarantees about 80% of it. Here, lose your job and you can be in great difficulty indeed. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you, Professor. I'm going to swing over to Tony. Now, Tony Gosling, and we have no idea at this point what the future relationship between the EU and the UK is going to look like. I mean, how do you digest that?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because the EU hasn't necessarily been good for Britain. I mean, there's a sort of, I suppose, security by big organisations. A lot of people feel they've got to join big clubs, that sort of thing. But I actually think that the industrial decline we've seen in the UK, I mean, obviously there is an element of that, which is the fault of government, of the City of London. But the thing is that we ceded, back in 1975, when we joined the common market, we ceded our industrial policy to Brussels. And this was the point that was being made at the time. Now, literally, I mean, I was just thinking earlier on today, I remember 1975, I was in the second year at my secondary school, grammar school. I didn't get a chance to vote on it at the time. But I remember thinking that this is not the right thing to do. I'd been listening to some of the arguments particularly from the Labour anti-marketeers, they called them, including Michael Foot, who was the Labour leader at the time. And he was saying, well, you won't be able to get rid of the people that you don't like if we join this European economic community. And he was absolutely right. And that's the way it's proved. What you've got, I'm afraid, is a topsy-turvy anti-democratic system in Brussels, which is effectively the European Commission really running the show. Now, they are the civil servants. They should be being told what to do by our elected politicians, really maybe even by the members of the European Parliament. But we have a very, I would call, perverse system whereby you have a whole bunch of appointed people actually as the president and the various portfolios of the main jobs of the EU. So this, I don't think, was really ever going to work. I spoke to a friend who's assistant to one of the MEPs back in the 1990s, and he was in the Green Party. They were looking, for example, at EU policy around waste incinerators. And there's a great, there's lots of money to be made in taking industrial waste, household waste, and just burning it, throwing that mess into the atmosphere, the grime out of the top of a chimney. And there's lots of money to be made getting rid of waste like that. But the Greens were very adamant, you're not going to do this. They put all the scientific arguments forward, and the EU still said, no, we're going to have incinerators across the whole of Europe. And he gave up and went home. He said, this organisation can never work. He said, I trained as an engineer, and I've seen what happens. Here, the politicians and the elected views of the nearly billion people who are in the EU are simply not being heard. And what's happening is the industrialists, the people that want to make money, the corporate directors, the lobbyists, they are in the driving seat. And this was back in the 1990s when we'd only just entered the political union. So we're in a peculiar situation now. So we've left all the political shenanigans through the Parliament and through the Commission and all that, but we're still in most of the other structures. So, for example, still in the single market, still in the customs union, and we're still under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. So we're in the same situation now as countries like Norway and Switzerland are, and they have been, and they've decided that's what their relationship wants to be. But this is no way, I mean, surely no place to be in the EU is to have no say. And that's what Switzerland and Norway have. They have no real say in the way that the policies come through. They've got no MEPs, etc. So that's, I think, in a nutshell, what we did is we did the wrong thing in 1973 when Edward Heath, the Conservative Prime Minister, who, by the way, has all sorts of scandals about him and relationships with young men, which is nothing to do with that. But he was, he is now a very bad reputation in Britain as somebody who was easily blackmailable. He joined without asking the people, the EEC, in 1973, and then we had a referendum in 75 to stay. And I remember, like I said at the time, thinking this is not going to go well. And it's great, actually, to see after so many years, what is it now, 45 years or so, to see the people's result actually begin to be implemented. Because this is the scandalous thing in this country, is that we've waited 3.5 years for a clear-cut decision to even be implemented. So that's why people are celebrating tonight. It's because really Theresa May did everything she could, even though she was supposed to be a Conservative Prime Minister, to stop the deal even happening.
Right, and originally the UK was set to get out. You very well remember, Tony. March 29th of last year, delayed twice after MPs rejected Mrs. May's deal. It involved the backstop on her third try. After that, she resigned. Third time, it got rejected. Then comes Boris Johnson, Tony, and then he basically scraps the backstop. My question to you: how does that impact things now when it comes to trade, and when the UK has to hammer out a free trade agreement? How is this backstop issue going to impact things?
Well, obviously the whole situation with Northern Ireland is extremely awkward, and it's good to see the Northern Ireland Assembly now sitting, because they should be making these decisions. You've got a growing Catholic minority in the north of Ireland that need to have their say, and who knows, maybe ultimately out of this will come a united Ireland. I don't think that would necessarily be a bad thing. And that actually might, they may decide they want to stay within the European Union or return and rejoin the same is true with Scotland potentially, but I don't think that referendum will be happening for a while. The main fact here, though, to do with trade is that with the former Bank of England Governor Mervyn King, who, by the way, was a very ordinary and a very meritocratic, he managed to work his way up from the bottom. His father was a railway porter that used to carry people's bags, and he went to a grammar school, and he managed to work his way up through the financial system, and then eventually become the governor of the Bank of England. Mervyn King, he has made it absolutely clear he doesn't think it's going to make any difference economically, really. Brexit, certainly not much perceptibly, because the fact is that the European markets want Britain, they want to be able to sell into the British market. You look at the German economy at the moment, it's tanking. It's having all sorts of trouble, even just staying still. They desperately need, because they've got all these manufactured products in Germany, they've got to sell those into the UK market. We've got lots of spending power, lots of spending money, so they need to do a deal if they want their economy to stay on the straight and narrow. Otherwise, so there is, I think it's quite clear to me that there are good reasons on both sides to cut a deal that's both for everybody. And I think this is part of the new attitude that I'm feeling here in the UK, is let's not get so partisan and hung up on this whole Brexit issue. Let's just get down and do what's best for everybody, maybe even hang up our prejudices on the wall when we go in to negotiate.
And Professor Shakespeare, I want to put that same question to you, because right to a transition period, and a new free trade agreement needs to be struck. And for our viewers that know what that is, a free trade agreement allows goods to move around the European Union without checks or extra charges. And if one is not struck with the UK in the time allotted by the end of the year, well, then guess what? We may see some serious tariffs and taxes on UK goods. Professor Shakespeare, your thoughts?
Yes, well, I do hope that Tony is right. He's taking a relatively optimistic view. If I could comment on a very interesting theme, which I think I detected throughout some of what he was saying, which is that he appeared to be putting some of the blame for economic insecurity on Europe. And I would just say it's actually much more serious than that. It is, in fact, the system which increases the power going towards the capital owners at the moment, and that the socialist solution to that, which is nationalisation, is essentially an outdated one. So there are phenomena going on of these insecure part-time gig economy jobs, which certainly are associated with Europe. If you're a young person in the south of Spain, 70% of them are now unemployed, and large areas of Italy, and all that's going on right the way through. But it's a manifestation of something which is bigger than Europe, and it is my belief that the forces leading to that insecurity, greater rich-poor division, in a sentence, more gig economy, I think they will be increased by those who are behind Brexit. That is my great fear. you actually look at them, and they're hard-faced right-wing exiteers. And
Yes, well,
so I'd like to think that Tony is right. I fear that in reality, a lot of people are going to find more trouble than what they expect.
All right, Tony, we have about 40 seconds left. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, Rodney's brought up something fascinating there, and that is the fact that you've got people who are behind the whole Brexit process, and they're determined to make lots of money out of it. So Boris Johnson, I was hearing earlier on, has banned his ministers going to parties. There are billionaires throwing parties in London saying, oh, we're going to make an absolute fortune on this. And of course, Rodney's absolutely right. The people who are going to suffer are the ordinary poor people. But there is a deal. It's a CETA deal, CETA deal with Canada. And that, I think, is going to form the basis of the way we negotiate into the future. I imagine, anyway, that will be almost a few changes to that. The Canada-EU deal, the Brits, that's exactly what the Brits are going to be going for. I think that's to be announced next week.
Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Rodney Shakespeare from London and Tony Gosling there joining us out of Bristol. And viewers, those are live images out of London. You can see Londoners out there in scores celebrating the UK's departure now officially. 11 p.m. London time from the European Union. We'll be watching out the transition period right here and following it closely on Press TV. Stay tuned and bye-bye for now.